Now, I want to make it very clear that today I'm not just going to talk about FIFO by itself. This is the Urban Development Institute, and my aim will be to talk about FIFO in such a way that you will be able to clearly see the opportunities that there are in this business, there are in this societal phenomenon. Now, we do some really interesting things when a new phenomenon approaches our society, and that is, firstly, we deal with it as though it has never happened before, and we deal with it independently of everything else. So all of a sudden there's something new, and we go, we have to address this thing. And the second thing we often do is use the new phenomenon as the villain for all the societal issues that happen to exist today, without recognising that there's been a precondition. So at the moment, FIFO is being blamed for the majority of society's issues as a whole. It's also being blamed for the breakdown of families, communities, relationships. It's about crime rates. Towns aren't as good as they used to be, companies are struggling, and the economy and everything else is in turmoil because of FIFO. The truth is that our communities have been crumbling for years. Family breakdowns haven't just started. Young people haven't simply decided to be difficult. Volunteerism has been in decline. Community clubs are struggling. We just find it handy to have something external to blame. So before we look at the FIFO opportunities that exist for the not in the resource sector, but for the development industry, I just want to set some context around where FIFO comes from and how it sits inside our society. But first, because of the complexity of FIFO, I want you to get in your minds that there needs to be a paradigm shift in the way that the development industry views the way it goes about doing its business. And there's already been a paradigm shift in the resource sector to some degree in the way that they view FIFO. Because now that there is that demand is greater than the supply, resource companies are going, actually we care about the decision a FIFO worker and their family make about joining our company and staying with our company. So as a result, we will care more for that worker and for that worker's family, even though that family might be located several thousand kilometres away. So there is a paradigm shift, and it needs to continue occurring. Now, the movement of people. Transients, people have been moving for one reason or another throughout history, from the beginning of time. It might be political or religious upheavals, it might be something to do with the environment, it might be economic desires or necessity, and it might be whimsical desires. We talk these days about sea change and tree change being about the desires of the whimsical rich deciding that they'll live somewhere else. And the truth is that we are in one of the most nomadic periods of our society's history. People keep moving. Now, in the Western Hemisphere, for at least the last 700 years, since the beginning of the mercantile era in Europe, people have moved to where the best opportunity for them economically resides. And as the centre of the economy moved around Europe, so people moved to follow that, to follow to where that particular city was that was driving the economy. Changes to agricultural processes in the 13th and 14th century saw people flocking to towns because they no longer needed the same range of, or the number of people to keep the agricultural industry operating successfully. And then the Industrial Revolution caused a mammoth change in the way that people lived and where people moved. The progress of the USA has been based around the migration flow of people, often for economic reasons, to the point where in about 1880 it became the leading economy in the world. Now that's in the Western Hemisphere. Interestingly, in the Eastern Hemisphere, around about the same time, in the Ming Dynasty, around about the 13th or 14th century, there was a significant increase in the movement of Chinese overseas. Now there were some political issues, as there often are, but it was often about strengthening the local economy. And there was a great book written in the early 1990s called The Lords of the Rim, and it talked about the overseas Chinese. And when I went and worked in Asia, it was one of the books I read to get an understanding about how Asia works. And it talks, in the 90s, there were about $3 to $4 trillion a year flowing through the Chinese businesses offshore back into China. So it has been something which has pervaded our history. There have been different clusters of movements. Sometimes it was whole towns or whole families or whole ethnic groups that had to move. But no matter what the cluster group, what the interesting thing that has occurred more and more regularly has been the remittance of money back to the back to the source community, back to where people came. It's enough to know that in the late 1940s, 21% of the GDP of Spain was from remittance of individual people living overseas and sending their money back. And today, in places like the Philippines, it's over 30% of the GDP is through remittances of people living overseas. Now, interesting, most remittances are coming from Saudi Arabia and the United States. But the really interesting thing is to note that the three countries that receive the most money from remittance are Israel, India and China. Their economies are dependent to some degree on the movement of money from overseas. So